Sometimes life hits you with a question so unexpected that it stops you dead in your tracks. I was just trying to fix a broken fence panel when Carol looked me straight in the eye and asked something that would change everything. If you love stories about unexpected connections and the courage to take chances, you're in the right place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jake, and I'm 35 years old, though most days I feel like I'm still figuring out what that's supposed to mean. I moved to Millbrook, Oregon about 8 months ago, drawn by the promise of affordable living and the kind of small-town atmosphere where people still wave at strangers. What I found was exactly that, plus the realization that starting over in your mid-30s is both liberating and terrifying in equal measure. I make my living as a handyman, which sounds more romantic than it actually is. Most days involve unclogging drains, replacing broken light fixtures, and convincing homeowners that yes, their 50-year-old electrical system really does need professional attention. I drive a beat-up Ford pickup that's older than some of my clients' children, and I've gotten used to the smell of sawdust and paint thinner that permanently clings to my clothes. The truth is, I never planned to be the guy who shows up at your door with a toolbox. 5 years ago, I was working in IT for a tech company in Portland, sitting in meetings about synergy and optimization while slowly losing my mind. The divorce finalized right around the time I realized I'd spent the better part of a decade in a cubicle, and something inside me just snapped. Not in a dramatic way, more like a rubber band that's been stretched too long and finally gives up. So I learned to fix things with my hands instead of code, traded my business cards for work boots, and discovered that there's something deeply satisfying about solving problems you can actually see and touch. Sure, I'm not making the money I used to, and my retirement plan now consists of hoping Social Security still exists when I'm old enough to need it, but I sleep better at night. Millbrook is the kind of town where everyone knows everyone else's business, which can be both comforting and suffocating depending on your mood. Main Street has a hardware store that's been run by the same family for 3 generations, a diner that serves coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and a bookshop that somehow manages to stay afloat despite the fact that most people order everything online these days. I rent a small apartment above the hardware store, which means I'm essentially living at work. But the owner, Pete, is a good guy who doesn't mind if I use the workshop after hours for my own projects. Plus, the rent is cheap enough that I can actually save a little money, something that felt impossible back in the city. My social life, if you can call it that, revolves around Tyler, who I met at Murphy's Diner during my second week in town. Tyler's one of those guys who seems to know everyone and has an opinion about everything, usually delivered with the kind of confidence that makes you wonder if he might actually be right. He works as a local real estate agent, which means he's got his finger on the pulse of who's moving where and why. Tyler's the one who got me most of my early jobs, spreading the word that there was a new handyman in town who showed up on time and didn't overcharge. He's also appointed himself as my unofficial life coach, constantly telling me I need to get out more and meet people. According to Tyler, my biggest problem is that I'm too picky and too scared to put myself out there. Then there's Sam, who I met through a job referral and who's become something like a work buddy. Sam's about my age and runs a small landscaping business, which means we often end up working on the same properties. He's got a dry sense of humor and a talent for finding the absurd in everyday situations. While Tyler pushes me to be more social, Sam's content to crack jokes and remind me not to take life too seriously. The job that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was sitting in Murphy's Diner, nursing my second cup of coffee and scrolling through messages from potential clients, when Tyler slid into the booth across from me with that grin that usually means he's got something up his sleeve. "I've got a job for you," he announced, stealing a piece of bacon from my plate. "Easy money. Lady needs her back fence fixed before winter hits." I looked up from my phone. "What's wrong with it?" "Storm damage from last month. A few panels came loose. Nothing major. She's been putting it off, but her neighbors are starting to complain about the gap." Tyler leaned back in his seat. "She's good people, Jake. Retired teacher, been in the same house for 20 years. Fair warning, though, she's got opinions." "What kind of opinions?" "The kind that come from dealing with teenagers for 30 years. She'll probably try to feed you lunch and ask about your life story." Tyler grinned. "Her name's Carol, and she's expecting you Thursday morning." I agreed. mostly because Tyler had sent enough work my way that turning him down felt ungrateful. Plus, fence repair was straightforward enough that I could probably knock it out in a day and still have time to finish the bathroom renovation I'd been working on across town. Thursday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn air that makes you grateful to be working outside. I loaded my truck with the materials I'd picked up from Pete's hardware store and drove through the older part of town, where the houses had big yards and mature trees that were just starting to turn colors. Carol's house was a classic 1960s ranch style, painted a soft yellow with white trim that looked like it had been touched up recently. The front yard was immaculate, with flower beds that showed the kind of attention to detail that comes from someone who actually enjoys gardening. I could see the problem area right away. A section of wooden fence along the back property line where two panels were hanging at odd angles, creating a gap that was both unsightly and probably a violation of some neighborhood covenant. I parked in the driveway and was unloading my tools when the front door opened. The woman who stepped out was not what I expected, though I'm not sure what I had expected exactly. Tyler had said she was a retired teacher, which in my mind had conjured up someone gray-haired and grandmotherly. Carol was definitely neither. She looked to be in her mid-50s, with shoulder-length brown hair that was streaked with silver, in a way that looked intentional rather than accidental. She was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had clearly seen some yard work, and she moved with the kind of confidence that suggested she was perfectly comfortable taking charge of any situation. "You must be Jake," she said, walking over with her hand extended. "Tyler told me you were the best handyman in town, which either means you're very good at what you do, or this town has very low standards." I shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "Let's hope it's the first one. I'm here about your fence." "Good, because it's been driving me crazy for weeks. Come on, I'll show you the damage." She led me around the side of the house to the backyard, which was even more impressive than the front. There was a vegetable garden that had obviously been productive all season, a small patio with comfortable-looking furniture, and several fruit trees that were heavy with apples. The problematic fence section was along the back edge of the property, where it separated her yard from the one behind it. "The wind really got hold of it during that storm," Carol explained, pointing to where two fence panels had pulled away from their posts. "I probably should have had it fixed years ago, but you know how it is with these old places. There's always something that needs attention." I walked over to examine the damage, testing the stability of the posts, and checking the condition of the wood. It was a straightforward repair job. Nothing that should take more than a few hours once I had everything measured and cut to size. "The posts are still solid," I told her. "I'll need to replace these two panels and reinforce the connections, but it's not as bad as it could have been." "That's a relief. How long do you think it will take?" "If I start now, I should have it finished by this afternoon. I'll need to run back to the hardware store for a couple pieces of lumber, but other than that, everything I need is in the truck." Carol nodded approvingly. "Perfect. I'll be inside if you need anything. Fair warning, I tend to check on progress periodically. Occupational hazard of 30 years in the classroom." I spent the next hour removing the damaged panels and cleaning up the mess left by the storm. It was satisfying work, the kind of methodical problem-solving that had drawn me to this line of work in the first place. The morning was warming up nicely, and I found myself enjoying the peaceful setting of Carol's backyard. True to her word, Carol did check on my progress, appearing every so often with questions about my approach or observations about the work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. But unlike some clients who hover out of anxiety or distrust, her interest seemed genuinely curious. She asked intelligent questions and listened carefully to my explanations, treating me like a professional rather than just hired help. Around 11 o'clock, she emerged from the house carrying a thermos and 2 mugs. "Coffee break?" she offered. "I made extra, and you look like you could use a caffeine boost." I was ready for a break anyway, so I set down my tools and accepted the mug gratefully. The coffee was excellent, strong and rich without being bitter. "This is really good," I said, settling onto a piece of lumber to rest my back. "Thanks, I'm particular about my coffee. Life's too short for bad caffeine." Carol sat down on a nearby patio chair, cradling her own mug. So Tyler tells me you're new to town. What brought you to Millbrook? It was a reasonable question, the kind of small talk that comes naturally in small towns. But something about the way she asked it made me want to give an honest answer, rather than the abbreviated version I usually offered. I needed a change, I said. I was working in tech up in Portland, sitting behind a computer all day, and I just burned out completely. Decided I wanted to work with my hands for a while, see what that felt like. And how's it working out? So far. Better than I expected, actually. I like the variety, the problem-solving aspect. Plus, there's something satisfying about finishing a job and being able to see exactly what you accomplished. Carol nodded thoughtfully. I can understand that. Teaching was like that in some ways. You'd work with kids all year, and then hopefully, send them off a little smarter and more confident than when they arrived. How long were you teaching? 32 years. All of it right here in Millbrook. High school English, which means I spent 3 decades trying to convince teenagers that Shakespeare was relevant to their lives. She smiled. Some days were more successful than others. We talked for a few more minutes about her teaching, career, and my transition from office work to manual labor. Carol was easy to talk to, with the kind of listening skills that probably served her well in the classroom. She asked follow-up questions that showed she was actually paying attention, and she shared enough about herself to keep the conversation balanced. When I got back to work, I found myself thinking about how rare it was to have that kind of genuine conversation with a client. Most of the time, people hired me to fix something, and then largely ignored me until the job was done. Carol's interest felt different, more personal somehow. By early afternoon, I had the new fence panels cut to size and was ready to install them. This was the part of the job that required the most precision, making sure everything lined up properly and would hold up to future weather. I was concentrating on getting the first panel positioned correctly when I heard Carol's voice behind me. That looks like it's going to be much stronger than what was there before. I glanced over my shoulder. She was standing a few feet away, watching me work with an expression I couldn't quite read. That's the idea, I said, turning back to my work. No point in doing a repair that won't last. Good philosophy. I imagine that applies to more than just fence work. There was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I felt something shift in the air between us. It was subtle, like the moment when you realize a conversation has moved from small talk to something more meaningful. But you're not sure exactly when it happened. I was still trying to figure out how to respond when Carol smiled and headed back toward the house. I'll let you get back to it, she said. Shout if you need anything. I spent the next 2 hours finishing the installation, but my mind kept wandering back to that moment and the feeling that something important had just happened, even if I couldn't put my finger on what it was. By the time I finished installing the last fence panel, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Carol's backyard. I stood back to admire my work, running my hand along the smooth wood to check for any rough spots that might need sanding. The new section looked solid and clean, blending seamlessly with the rest of the fence line. I was loading my tools back into the truck when Carol appeared again, this time carrying what looked like a plate covered with a kitchen towel. All finished? She asked, walking over to inspect the repair. Just wrapped up. Should hold up to whatever weather you get this winter. I wiped my hands on a rag, suddenly aware that I probably looked like I'd been wrestling with lumber all day, which wasn't far from the truth. Carol walked along the fence line, running her own hand over the new panels. This is beautiful work, Jake, much better than what was there before. You weren't kidding about making it stronger. I don't believe in quick fixes. If I'm going to do something, I want it done right the first time. She turned to look at me, and again I felt that same shift in the air, like we were having 2 conversations at once. I can respect that approach, she said. Too many people these days are looking for the easy way out. I was trying to think of an appropriate response when she lifted the towel from the plate, revealing what looked like homemade chocolate chip cookies. Payment, she announced with a grin. Well, partial payment anyway. I still owe you actual money, but Tyler mentioned you had a sweet tooth. Tyler talks too much, I said, but I was smiling as I said it. The cookies smelled incredible, still warm from the oven. You didn't have to do this. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. Besides, I made way too many for one person. She held the plate out to me. Go ahead, try one. I need to know if my baking skills have survived retirement. I took a cookie and bit into it. It was perfect, the kind of homemade goodness that makes store-bought versions taste like cardboard by comparison. Your baking skills definitely survived, I said around a mouthful of cookie. These are incredible. Good. I was worried I might be getting rusty. Carol set the plate down on a nearby patio table. Can I ask you something, Jake? Sure. She hesitated for a moment, like she was choosing her words carefully. Do you ever feel like you're starting over at an age when everyone else seems to have it all figured out? The question caught me off guard, partly because of how personal it was, and partly because it hit so close to home. I swallowed the last bite of cookie and really looked at her, trying to read what was behind the question. Every day, I admitted. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy for throwing away a perfectly good career to become the guy who fixes other people's problems. But you're happier now? I thought about it for a moment. Yeah, I think I am. It's scarier, not knowing exactly where I'll be in 5 years. But it feels more honest somehow. Like I'm actually living my life instead of just going through the motions. Carol nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About what it means to start over, to take risks when you're supposed to have everything settled. What kind of risks? She looked away, focusing on something in the distance. Oh, moving somewhere new, trying something different, opening yourself up to possibilities you might not have considered before. There was definitely something more behind her words, but I couldn't quite grasp what it was. Before I could probe deeper, she seemed to shake herself out of whatever mood had settled over her. Anyway, she said, her tone becoming more businesslike, what do I owe you for the fence? I gave her my standard rate, which was fair but not cheap. Quality work costs money, and I'd learned not to undervalue my skills just because I was new to town. Carol wrote me a check without hesitation, adding a generous tip that I tried to refuse before she waved away my protests. Good work deserves good payment, she said firmly. Besides, you saved me from having to listen to Mrs. Patterson next door complain about property values for another month. We both laughed, and the moment of tension from earlier seemed to dissipate. I packed up the last of my tools and was getting ready to leave when Carol spoke again. Jake, would you be interested in looking at a few other projects around the house? Nothing urgent, but there are always things that need attention when you own an older place. Of course. What kind of projects? Well, there's a squeaky hinge on the garden gate that's been driving me crazy, and I think one of the gutters might be coming loose. Plus, I've been wanting to build a small storage shed in the corner of the yard, but I wasn't sure if that was something I should tackle myself. I can definitely help with all of that. The shed project sounds interesting, actually. Do you have any ideas about size or style? Carol's face lit up. I do, actually. I've been sketching out some ideas. Would you like to see them? Before I knew it, I was following her into the house, which was as thoughtfully maintained as the yard. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with granite counters and cabinets that looked like they'd been recently refinished. Carol pulled out a folder from a drawer and spread several hand-drawn sketches across the kitchen table. I'm not an architect, she said apologetically, but I tried to work out the basic dimensions and placement. I studied the drawings, impressed by the level of detail she'd included. The shed design was simple but functional, with windows for natural light and enough space for both gardening supplies and general storage. These are really good, I said, meaning it. You've thought through all the practical considerations. This corner location makes sense, and the size is perfect for your yard. Really? I wasn't sure if I was being realistic about what would fit. No, this is very doable. We'd need to check on building permits for the township, but for something this size, it should be pretty straightforward. We spent the next half hour going over the details, discussing materials and timeline. Carol made coffee, and somehow, the conversation expanded beyond construction to cover everything from her experiences teaching to my adventures in career transition. I found myself telling her about the moment I'd realized I was miserable in my old job, sitting in a conference room listening to my boss explain why the company needed to pivot their core competencies, while I stared out the window and wondered, what it would be like to actually build something tangible. The worst part was feeling trapped, I admitted. Like I'd made all these decisions that led to this life that didn't really feel like mine. Carol nodded knowingly. I felt something similar toward the end of my teaching career. I loved working with kids, but the bureaucracy was suffocating. Every year there were new mandates and testing requirements that had nothing to do with actually educating students. Is that why you retired? Partly. That and… She paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. I went through a divorce about 3 years ago. Nothing dramatic. Just two people who realized they'd grown into different versions of themselves and didn't fit together anymore. It made me reevaluate a lot of things. I wasn't sure how to respond to that level of personal disclosure, but Carol didn't seem to expect a response. She was looking out the kitchen window at the newly repaired fence, lost in her own thoughts. I'm sorry, she said after a moment. I don't usually share my life story with contractors. I don't mind. Actually, it's refreshing to have a real conversation for a change. Most of my clients either ignore me completely or treat me like I'm invisible. Well, that's their loss. You're clearly more than just a guy with a toolbox. Something in the way she said it made me look at her more carefully. There was an openness in her expression that felt both inviting and slightly dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff and being tempted to see how far you could lean without falling. My phone buzzed with a text message, breaking the moment. It was Tyler, asking if I was still working or if I wanted to meet him at Murphy's for dinner. I should probably get going, I said, though part of me didn't want to leave. But I'll put together an estimate for those other projects and get back to you by tomorrow. That sounds perfect. And Jake, thank you for today. Not just for the fence, but for the conversation. It's been a while since I had a chance to talk to someone who actually listens. I drove home thinking about that comment and what it might mean. Carol was clearly an intelligent, accomplished woman who probably had plenty of friends and social connections. What was it about our conversation that felt different to her? Tyler was already seated at our usual booth when I walked into Murphy's, studying the menu like he didn't order the same thing every time we ate there. How'd the fence job go? He asked as I slid into the seat across from him. Good. Straightforward repair. Nothing complicated. And Carol? What did you think of her? There was something in Tyler's tone that made me suspicious. She's nice. Professional. Made excellent cookies. Tyler grinned. She's single, you know. Tyler. What? I'm just saying. She's been divorced for a few years, and she's not dating anyone as far as I know. She's also probably 15 years older than me. So? Age is just a number. Man, besides, you said yourself that you're tired of women who don't know what they want. Carol definitely knows what she wants. I thought about my conversation with Carol, about the way she talked about starting over and taking risks. How do you know so much about her personal life anyway? Small town, Jake. Plus, she's friends with my aunt. They have lunch together every couple of weeks and apparently discuss everything under the sun. Our food arrived before I could respond, which was probably for the best. Tyler had a way of planting ideas in my head that took root whether I wanted them to or not. The truth was, I had enjoyed talking to Carol more than I'd enjoyed talking to anyone in months, but that didn't necessarily mean anything romantic was happening. After dinner, I drove back to my apartment and spent the evening working on estimates for Carol's additional projects. I found myself being more thorough than usual, researching different materials and design options that might appeal to her. When I caught myself looking up decorative hardware for the storage shed that would cost more than the basic functional version, I realized Tyler might have been onto something. The next morning, I was delivering a completed bathroom renovation, invoice to a client across town when I ran into Sam at the hardware store. He was loading bags of mulch into his truck, preparing for what looked like a major landscaping project. Hey, Jake, how's business? Can't complain. Just finished a fence repair yesterday, picked up a few more projects from the same client. That's great. Word of mouth is the best advertising in this business. We chatted for a few minutes about work and the unusually mild fall weather. As I was getting ready to leave, Sam gave me a curious look. Tyler mentioned you met Carol Henderson yesterday. What did you think of her? Why does everyone in this town know everyone else's business? Sam laughed. Because there's not much else to talk about. But seriously, Carol's good people. She Helped my daughter with college application essays last year. Wouldn't take any payment for it. She seems really nice. Very down to earth. Yeah, and tough as nails when she needs to be. She had to deal with some difficult parents during her teaching years. Never let them push her around. Sam loaded the last bag of mulch and closed his tailgate. She deserves someone who appreciates what a cat she is. Sam, I'm just saying, you're both single, you're both smart, and you both deserve to be happy. Sometimes the universe puts people in your path for a reason. I drove away, thinking about how everyone seemed to have opinions about my love life, or lack thereof. But their comments had made me more aware of something I'd been trying to ignore. I was attracted to Carol, not just physically, though she was definitely beautiful in a way that seemed to improve with age rather than fade. It was more than that. She had a quality of presence that drew me in, a combination of confidence and vulnerability that made me want to know more about her. That afternoon, I stopped by Carol's house to drop off the estimates for her additional projects. She answered the door wearing paint-splattered clothes and holding a brush. "Perfect timing," she said. "I just finished touching up the trim in the guest bedroom and could use a break." She invited me in for coffee, and we spread the estimates across her kitchen table. I'd prepared detailed breakdowns for each project, including multiple options for materials and finishes. "This is incredibly thorough," Carol said, studying the shed construction estimate. "You've thought of everything." I like to give clients options. Sometimes people want basic functionality, and sometimes they want something that adds to the aesthetic of their property. Carol pointed to the premium option, which included cedar siding and decorative trim. "I like this version. It's worth spending a little more to get something that will look good for years to come." We went through each estimate, discussing timelines and logistics. Carol asked intelligent questions and made decisions quickly, without the endless second-guessing that some clients go through. "So when could you start?" she asked when we'd finished reviewing everything. "Next week if you want. I've got one. Small job to finish up, but after that my schedule is pretty open." "That sounds perfect." As I was gathering up the paperwork, Carol hesitated, then spoke again. "Jake, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Are you seeing anyone? Dating, I mean?" The question caught me completely off guard. "No, I'm not. Why?" Carol looked down at her hands, suddenly seeming less confident than usual. "I have a friend, Linda, who's been asking me to set her up with someone. She's about your age, works as a nurse at the medical center. I thought maybe you two might hit it off." I felt a strange mix of disappointment and confusion. "Oh, sure, I guess. I mean, I'm not actively looking to date anyone right now, but of course, no pressure. I just thought I'd mention it." Carol's smile seemed forced. "Linda's really lovely, funny, smart, great sense of humor. Sounds like she's quite a catch." "She is. Any man would be lucky to have her attention." We stood there for a moment in awkward silence, both of us apparently unsure how to navigate this sudden shift in the conversation. Finally, I cleared my throat and made noises about needing to get back to work. "I'll give you a call early next week about scheduling the projects," I said, heading toward the door. "Sounds good. And I'll talk to Linda, see if she's interested in meeting you." I drove away feeling confused and slightly deflated, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Carol had been perfectly friendly and professional, and it made sense that she might want to help a friend meet someone. So why did the whole interaction feel wrong somehow? That evening, Tyler called while I was making dinner, which for me meant heating up leftover pizza and calling it a meal. "So how did the estimate meeting go?" "Fine. She approved all the additional projects, wants to start next week." "That's great. What else?" "What do you mean, what else?" "I can hear it in your voice, man. Something happened." I told him about Carol's offer to set me up with her friend Linda. Tyler was quiet for a moment after I finished. "Huh," he said finally. "Huh, what?" "I don't know. That seems a little weird, doesn't it? I mean, you two seemed to have some kind of connection yesterday." "We had a conversation, Tyler. Two adults can have a conversation without it meaning anything romantic." "Can they? Because my aunt mentioned that Carol seemed unusually interested when I told her I was sending you over to fix her fence." "Your aunt has an overactive imagination." "Maybe. Or maybe Carol was testing the waters to see if you're available, and when you seemed receptive to being set up with someone else, she backed off. I thought about the way Carol's demeanor had changed after I'd agreed to meet her friend, how her smile had seemed less genuine. That's a pretty big leap, Tyler. Is it? Think about it, Jake. Attractive older woman, recently divorced, clearly appreciates your work and enjoys talking to you. Then she asks if you're dating anyone, and when you say no, she immediately tries to set you up with a friend instead of expressing any interest herself. That sounds like someone who was interested but got scared off. Or it sounds like someone being nice and trying to help a friend. Could be, but there's only one way to find out for sure. Which is? Ask her out yourself. I nearly choked on my pizza. Tyler? She's 15 years older than me. So what? You're both consenting adults. You're both single. You obviously enjoy each other's company. What's the problem? The problem is that she's a client, for one thing. And for another, I have no idea if she's even interested in dating someone my age. She's not just a client. She's a potential friend. And you'll never know if she's interested unless you take a chance. After Tyler hung up, I sat in my small apartment thinking about our conversation. The rational part of my brain said he was reading too much into a simple social interaction. But another part of me kept replaying the moments when Carol and I had looked at each other. The feeling that there was something unspoken happening between us. I was still debating with myself when my phone rang. It was Carol. Hi, Jake. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all. What's up? I talked to Linda about meeting you, and she's definitely interested. I was thinking maybe we could all have dinner together this weekend. You know, casual, no pressure. That sounds fine, I said, though it didn't feel fine at all. Great. How about Saturday night? There's a nice restaurant downtown, Marcello's. Do you know it? Yeah, I've driven past it. Perfect. 7 o'clock? I'll be there. After I hung up, I realized I'd just agreed to what was essentially a blind date arranged by the woman I was actually interested in. If Tyler was right about Carol testing the waters, I'd just failed the test spectacularly. And if he was wrong, then I was about to have dinner with a woman named Linda while spending the entire evening wishing I was there with Carol instead. Either way, Saturday night was going to be interesting. Saturday evening arrived faster than I wanted it to. I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to decide what to wear to dinner at Marcello's, finally settling on dark jeans and a button-down shirt that Tyler had insisted I buy when I first moved to town. The shirt still had the tags on it, which should have told me something about my social life over the past 8 months. Marcello's was the kind of restaurant that Millbrook was probably proud to have, with dim lighting, checkered tablecloths, and the smell of garlic and herbs wafting from the kitchen. Carol was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, looking elegant in a simple black dress that made me suddenly aware of how underdressed I felt. Jake, perfect timing, she said, standing to greet me. Linda should be here any minute. She texted that she was just parking. I slid into the seat across from Carol, trying to ignore the way the candlelight caught the silver in her hair. So tell me about Linda. What should I know? Well, she's 34, works in pediatric nursing at the medical center. She moved here about 2 years ago from Seattle, so she's still relatively new to town too. Carol fidgeted with her wine glass, not quite meeting my eyes. She's really passionate about her work, loves hiking, and she volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. She sounds great, I said, meaning it but not feeling it. She is. You two have a lot in common, actually. You're both transplants, both caring professions in your own ways, both figuring out what you want your life to look like. Before I could respond, a woman approached our table with an apologetic smile. Linda was attractive in a wholesome, outdoorsy way, with short blonde hair and the kind of healthy glow that comes from spending time in nature. She wore jeans and a sweater that suggested she was more comfortable with casual than Carol's polished elegance. Sorry I'm late, Linda said, embracing Carol warmly before turning to me. You must be Jake. Carol's told me so much about you. All good things, I hope, I said, standing to shake her hand. Definitely. She mentioned you're the miracle worker, who finally fixed her fence situation. We all sat down, and the conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected. Linda was funny and self-deprecating, with stories from the hospital that ranged from heartwarming to absurd. She asked good questions about my transition from tech work to handyman services, and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Carol played the role of facilitator perfectly, steering the conversation when it lagged and making sure both Linda and I had chances to share. But I found myself watching Carol more than I was focusing on Linda, noticing the way she smiled at Linda's jokes and how she seemed genuinely invested in making sure her friend had a good time. "So, Jake," Linda said during a lull in the conversation, "Carol mentioned you're working on some projects for her. Building a storage shed?" "That's the plan. She's got some really thoughtful ideas about the design. Carol's always been good at that kind of thing. When I was looking for apartments, she helped me visualize how to arrange furniture in spaces that seemed impossibly small." Linda grinned at Carol. "Remember that place on Elm Street with the weird alcove?" "Oh God, that was like an architectural puzzle," Carol laughed. "We spent 2 hours with measuring tape and graph paper trying to figure out if a couch would fit." "Did it?" I asked. "Barely," Linda said. But Carol was right about the flow. It ended up being perfect once I got everything arranged. I watched the easy friendship between the two women and felt a strange pang of something that might have been jealousy. Not romantic jealousy exactly, but envy for the kind of comfortable connection they shared. Carol seemed more relaxed with Linda than she did with me, less guarded somehow. The evening continued pleasantly enough. Linda was engaging company, and under different circumstances, I probably would have been genuinely interested in getting to know her better. She was smart, funny, and clearly a good person. But every time she laughed at something I said, I found myself glancing at Carol to see her reaction. After dinner, we stood outside the restaurant making the kind of polite conversation that happens when everyone knows the evening is winding down, but no one wants to be the first to leave. "This was really nice," Linda said. "Jake, would you be interested in going hiking next weekend? There's a trail up to Miller's Point that has amazing views this time of year." I hesitated, caught between politeness and honesty. "That sounds great. Can I give you a call this week?" "Of course." Linda hugged Carol goodbye and shook my hand warmly. "I'll talk to you soon, Jake." After Linda left, Carol and I stood on the sidewalk in awkward silence. The evening air was cool, with the kind of crisp edge that promised winter wasn't far away. "That went well," Carol said finally. "Linda really likes you. She's wonderful. You're a good friend for thinking of us." Carol smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I should get going too. Early morning tomorrow." "Carol, wait." The words came out before I'd really thought them through. "Can I ask you something?" She paused, keys already in her hand. "Of course. Why did you set me up with Linda instead of—" I trailed off, suddenly realizing I had no idea how to finish that sentence without making a complete fool of myself. "Instead of what?" "Never mind, it's not important." Carol studied my face in the dim streetlight. "Jake, what are you really asking?" I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. "I'm asking why you didn't consider that. Maybe I'd rather have dinner with you." The words hung in the air between us, and I immediately regretted saying them. Carol's expression was unreadable, and the silence stretched long enough that I started mentally composing an apology. "Jake," she said quietly, "I'm 55 years old." "So? So you're what, 35? You should be dating someone like Linda, someone who's at the same stage of life as you are." "Shouldn't I get to decide what stage of life I'm at?" Carol looked away, focusing on something down the street. "It's complicated." "What's complicated about it?" "Everything. The age difference, the fact that you're working on my house, what people would think." "I don't care what people think." "Well, I do." Her voice was sharper than I'd heard it before. "I care because I've lived in this town for 20 years, and I know how quickly gossip spreads. I care because I just went through a divorce that had the whole neighborhood talking for months, and I care because you're a sweet guy who doesn't deserve to get tangled up with someone who comes with as much baggage as I do." "What if I'm willing to risk the baggage?" Carol shook her head. "You say that now, but you don't know what you're talking about. My ex-husband spent 3 years telling me I was too old, too set in my ways, too demanding. He made me feel like I was asking for too much just by existing. I'm not your ex-husband. No, you're not. You're a good man who deserves someone, without all the complications. She turned to walk away, but I reached out and gently touched her arm. Carol, what if you let me decide what I deserve? For a moment, I thought she might stay and continue the conversation, but then she pulled away and shook her head again. Good night, Jake. I'll see you next week when you start on the projects. I watched her walk to her car, feeling like I'd somehow managed to both say too much and not enough at the same time. The drive home was a blur of regret and confusion, punctuated by my phone buzzing with a text from Linda, thanking me for a lovely evening and suggesting we definitely go hiking soon. Sunday morning found me at Murphy's Diner, nursing coffee and trying to process the previous evening's disaster. Tyler slid into the booth across from me without invitation, took one look at my face, and started laughing. That bad, huh? How did you know? Because you look like someone kicked your dog. Plus, Linda called my aunt this morning to gush about what a nice guy you are and how she hopes you call her soon. I groaned and put my head in my hands. This is a mess, Tyler. What happened? I told him about the dinner, about my awkward attempt to ask Carol why she'd set me up with someone else, and about her reaction to my implied interest in her instead. Well, at least now you know where you stand, Tyler said when I finished. Do I? Because I have no idea what just happened. What happened is that Carol is interested but scared. Everything she said about age and baggage and gossip, that's all fear talking. Or it's legitimate concerns that I'm too stubborn to acknowledge. Tyler shook his head. Jake, I've known Carol for years through my family connections. She's not the kind of woman who makes decisions based on what other people think. And she's definitely not the kind of woman who would set up a man she's interested in with one of her friends, unless she was trying to protect herself from something. Protect herself from what? From getting hurt again. Think about what she told you. Her ex-husband made her feel too old and too demanding. Now here's this younger guy showing interest. And instead of believing it's real, she's probably thinking it's either a phase you'll grow out of, or that you're just being kind to the lonely older woman. I thought about the way Carol had looked when she talked about her divorce, the pain that was still visible beneath her confident exterior. So what do? You prove her wrong. You show her that your interest is genuine and that you're not going anywhere. How? Start with the work projects. Be professional, be consistent, and don't push the personal stuff. Let her see that you're serious about sticking around, both for the work and for whatever else might develop. And what about Linda? Tyler grimaced. That's trickier. You need to be honest with her sooner rather than later. She seems like a nice person who doesn't deserve to be strung along while you figure out your feelings for someone else. I spent the rest of Sunday dreading the phone call I needed to make to Linda. Finally, late in the afternoon, I gathered my courage and dialed her number. Jake, hi. I was hoping I'd hear from you today. Linda, I wanted to thank you for last night. You're absolutely wonderful, and any guy would be lucky to spend time with you. There was a pause. I hear a but coming. But I think I need to be honest with you about something. I'm interested in someone else, and it wouldn't be fair to you to pretend otherwise. Linda was quiet for a moment. Is it Carol? The question surprised me. What makes you ask that? The way you looked at her during dinner, and the way she looked at you when she thought no one was watching. She looked at me. Linda laughed softly. Jake, Carol spent half the evening trying not to stare at you. I started wondering if I was the third wheel on my own blind date. I'm sorry, Linda. I never meant for this to be awkward. It's not awkward, it's just complicated. Carol's been hurt before, and she's convinced herself that she's too old to start over with someone younger. But for what it's worth, I think you two would be good together. Really? Really. You both overthink everything. You're both more sensitive than you want to admit, and you both deserve to be happy. Just don't give up on her too easily, okay? Sometimes the best things are worth fighting for. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about Linda's words. Carol had been watching me during dinner. That had to mean something, right? But then I remembered the firmness in her voice when she told me I deserved someone without complications. and I wondered if I was reading too much into stolen glances and moments of connection. Monday morning brought a return to routine, with a bathroom renovation that needed finishing and a kitchen faucet that had decided to start leaking at the worst possible time. I threw myself into the work, grateful for problems that had clear solutions and didn't require me to navigate the complexities of human emotion. It was Tuesday afternoon when Carol called about scheduling the start of her additional projects. "Hi, Jake. I wanted to check on when you might be able to start on the garden gate and gutters." Her voice was carefully neutral, professionally, polite in a way that felt like a step backward from the easy conversation we'd shared the previous week. "I can start Thursday if that works for you. Should take about 2 days to finish everything except the shed." "That sounds perfect. I'll plan to be around in case you need anything." "Carol," I said, then stopped, not sure what I wanted to say. "Yes?" "About Saturday night. I hope I didn't make things awkward between us." "Of course not. You were honest about your feelings, and I appreciate that. I hope there are no hard feelings about my response." "None at all." But there were hard feelings, just not the kind she meant. I was frustrated with myself for handling the situation so poorly, and disappointed that we seemed to have lost the easy rapport we'd been building. Most of all, I was confused about how to move forward when the woman I was interested in had made it clear that my interest wasn't welcome. Thursday morning, I arrived at Carol's house with my tools and a determination to keep things professional. She met me at the door with coffee and a polite smile that felt like a wall between us. "The garden gate is this way," she said, leading me around to the side yard. "It's the hinge on the left that's been squeaking." I examined the gate, which was a simple matter of removing the old hinge pin and replacing it with a new one. A 5-minute job that Carol could have easily done herself if she'd had the right tools. "This should be quick," I said, getting my tool bag organized. "Good. I have some errands to run anyway, so I'll leave you to it." She disappeared into the house, and I found myself missing the way she used to check on my progress and ask questions about the work. This new distance felt like punishment for my honesty on Saturday night, and I wondered if I'd permanently damaged whatever connection we'd been building. The gate repair took exactly as long as I'd estimated, and the gutter adjustment was only slightly more complex. I was finishing up the gutters when Carol returned from her errands, carrying grocery bags, and looking surprised to see me wrapping up. "All finished already?" "Just need to clean up my tools. Everything should be good as new." She tested the gate, swinging it back and forth to confirm the squeak was gone. "Perfect. What do I owe you?" I gave her the invoice, and she wrote a check with the same efficiency she'd shown the previous week. But there was none of the warmth or personal conversation that had made our earlier interactions feel special. "Jake," she said as I was loading my tools into the truck, "I've been thinking about the shed project. Having second thoughts? Not exactly. But I wonder if it might be better to wait until spring. Give me more time to think about exactly what I want." I studied her face, trying to read what was really behind the delay. "Of course. It's your project, your timeline." "Good. I'll give you a call when I'm ready to move forward." As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Carol was finding reasons to postpone the shed project because it would mean more time working together, more opportunities for the kind of personal conversations that had gotten us into trouble in the first place. And maybe that was for the best. Maybe she was right that we came from different stages of life, and that pursuing anything beyond a professional relationship was a mistake. But as I pulled into my apartment complex, I realized I didn't want to accept that conclusion, not yet. Part 4. The test. 3 weeks passed without a word from Carol, and I found myself checking my phone more often than I cared to admit. The rational part of my brain said this was exactly what should happen. She'd made her position clear. I'd respected it, and we'd both moved on with our lives. The problem was that I couldn't actually move on. I threw myself into work, taking on more projects than usual, and saying yes to jobs I normally might have passed up. Mrs. Patterson, Carol's neighbor, hired me to rebuild her front steps after seeing the fence work I'd done. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now working 2 houses away from Carol, close enough to see her car in the driveway, but with a professional obligation to stay focused on someone else's problems. Mrs. Patterson was the kind of client who hovered constantly, offering unsolicited advice about everything from the grade of lumber I was using to the weather forecast for the following week. On my second day working at her house, she brought up Carol directly. "I see you did some work for Carol Henderson a few weeks back," she said, settling into a lawn chair to supervise my progress on her steps. "Yes, ma'am. Fence repair and a few small maintenance items." "Good for her. That place needs attention. Since her divorce, she's been letting things slide a bit." Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think she's been struggling more than she lets on." I tried to keep my expression neutral while measuring the rise for each step. "The house seems well maintained to me." "Oh, the house is fine. I'm talking about emotionally. That divorce really took it out of her. Her ex-husband was a piece of work, always making her feel like nothing she did was good enough." Mrs. Patterson shook her head disapprovingly. "Man had the nerve to leave her for someone half his age, then had the audacity to tell people Carol was too set in her ways to make him happy." I felt a flash of anger on Carol's behalf but kept my voice steady. "That must have been difficult for her. More than difficult. Carol's one of the strongest women I know, but that man broke something in her. She's been keeping to herself ever since, turning down invitations, avoiding social events. I worry she's given up on finding happiness again." Mrs. Patterson continued her commentary while I worked, sharing more details about Carol's marriage and divorce than I was comfortable hearing, but I found myself listening despite my better judgment, trying to piece together a fuller picture of what Carol had been through. According to Mrs. Patterson, Carol's ex-husband had become increasingly critical and demanding in the years before their divorce. He'd complained about her career taking too much time away from him, then criticized her for not being ambitious enough when she'd scaled back her involvement in school activities. He'd made snide comments about her appearance and age, comparing her unfavorably to younger women in their social circle. "The worst part," Mrs. Patterson said, "was watching Carol start to believe his criticism. She's a beautiful, accomplished woman, but by the end of that marriage, she was acting like she was lucky anyone would put up with her." I finished the STEP project that afternoon, with a much clearer understanding of why Carol had reacted so strongly to my interest. If she'd spent years being told she was too old and too demanding, my attention might have felt more like pity than genuine attraction. That evening, Tyler called with an invitation to join him and some friends for drinks at a new bar that had opened on the outskirts of town. I wasn't particularly in the mood for socializing, but sitting alone in my apartment wasn't doing much for my state of mind either. The bar was crowded and loud, filled with a mix of locals and what looked like college students from the community college one town over. Tyler was holding court at a large table, regaling his audience with stories from his real estate adventures. I grabbed a beer and settled in to listen, grateful for the distraction. "Jake!" Tyler called out when he spotted me. Perfect timing. I was just telling everyone about the house on Maple Street with the indoor hot tub in the master bedroom. Indoor hot tub? Right in the middle of the bedroom, no separation at all. The whole room was like a steam bath. Couldn't figure out how anyone slept in there without growing gills. The conversation meandered through various real estate horror stories, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in weeks. It felt good to laugh at something that had nothing to do with my complicated feelings about Carol Henderson. I was getting ready to leave when I spotted a familiar figure at the bar. Carol was sitting alone, nursing what looked like a glass of wine and scrolling through her phone. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, in a way that made her look younger than her 55 years. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then Carol lifted her hand in a small wave, and I found myself walking over before I'd really decided to do it. "Hi," I said, settling onto the bar stool next to her. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Hi yourself. I'm not usually a bar person, but Linda dragged me out for a girls' night. She abandoned me for the dart game about 20 minutes ago." I looked around and spotted Linda near the back of the bar, engaged in what appeared to be a very competitive game with 3 men I didn't recognize. She seems to be holding her own. Linda's surprisingly good at darts. Something about hand-eye coordination from all those years of giving injections. Carol smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it looked genuine. "What about you? Out with Tyler's crowd?" "Something like that. I was actually getting ready to leave when I saw you." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and I was struck by how much I'd missed just being in her presence. Even without conversation, there was something calming about sitting next to her. Something that felt like coming home after a long day. "Jake," Carol said finally, "about what happened a few weeks ago. I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "I do, actually. I handled that conversation poorly. You were honest with me about your feelings, and I responded defensively instead of appreciating the courage that took." I turned to look at her more directly. "You had every right to be defensive. I put you in an uncomfortable position. Maybe, but that doesn't excuse the way I've been treating you since then. Professional distance is one thing, but I've been cold, and that's not fair. Carol, you made your position clear. I respect that." She took a sip of her wine, seeming to gather her thoughts. "The thing is, I'm not sure my position was entirely honest." "What do you mean?" "I mean that when you asked why I set you up with Linda instead of considering myself, I gave you all the reasons why it would be a bad idea, but I didn't tell you the real reason." "Which was?" Carol looked down at her hands. "I was scared. I'm 55 years old, Jake, and I haven't felt attracted to someone in years. When you showed up to fix my fence and we started talking, something woke up that I thought was dead and buried. I felt my heart speed up, but tried to keep my voice steady. That doesn't sound like something to be scared of." "It is when you've spent the last 3 years convincing yourself that part of your life is over. It is when the last man who claimed to care about you spent years making you feel like you were asking for too much just by wanting to be loved." The pain in her voice was raw and immediate, and I had to resist the urge to reach out and take her hand. "Carol, what your ex-husband did to you was wrong. The way he treated you says nothing about who you are and everything about who he is. Logically, I know that. But emotional scars don't heal just because you understand them intellectually. No, they don't. But they don't have to define the rest of your life either." Carol turned to face me fully, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. "Jake, even if I could get past my own baggage, there's still the age difference. You're 35. You should be with someone who can give you children, someone who's building a life instead of rebuilding one. What if I don't want children? What if I'm more interested in building something with someone who knows who she is and what she wants?" "You say that now, but what about in 5 years? 10 years? What happens when I'm 65 and you're 45, and you realize what you've given up?" I thought about how to answer that, how to make her understand that the age difference that terrified her didn't feel like a barrier to me. "Carol, I can't promise you what I'll want in 10 years, because nobody can promise that. But I can tell you that right now, in this moment, you're the most interesting, attractive woman I've met in years. Age isn't what draws me to you. It's your intelligence, your kindness, the way you think about things, the way you make me want to be a better version of myself. But what if we both get hit by lightning tomorrow? What if the economy crashes and we both lose everything we've worked for? What if aliens invade?" I smiled, trying to lighten the mood slightly. "Carol, life is uncertain no matter what age you are. The only real choice is whether you let fear keep you from taking chances on things that might make you happy." Before Carol could respond, Linda appeared beside us, slightly out of breath and grinning with triumph. "I just destroyed 3 guys at darts and won $50, she announced. "Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't wait to tell someone." "That's amazing," Carol said, though her voice sounded a bit strained. "Jake, this is Linda. Linda, you remember Jake?" "Of course. Hi, Jake. How are you?" "Good, thanks. Congratulations on your dart victory." Linda glanced between Carol and me, clearly picking up on some undercurrent in our conversation. "Am I interrupting something important?" "We were just catching up," Carol said quickly. "Jake was telling me about some of his recent projects." I felt a stab of disappointment at how quickly Carol had retreated back into safe territory, but I tried not to let it show. "Actually," Linda said, "I should probably head home. Early shift tomorrow. Carol, do you want to stay, or should I drop you off?" Carol hesitated, looking at me uncertainly. "I should probably go too." "Of course," I said, standing up. "It was good to see you both." "Jake," Carol said as I started to walk away, "could I call you sometime? About the shed project. I've been thinking it might be time to move forward with it after all. I studied her face, trying to read what was really behind the offer. Sure. You have my number. I rejoined Tyler's group for a few more minutes, but my heart wasn't in the conversation anymore. The brief exchange with Carol had left me feeling both hopeful and frustrated. She'd admitted to being attracted to me, acknowledged that her fears were based on past hurt rather than present reality, but she'd still pulled back the moment Linda appeared. Tyler noticed my distraction and followed me outside when I finally decided to leave. Okay, what happened in there? You look like someone who just got good news and bad news at the same time. I told him about my conversation with Carol, about her admission of attraction and her continued concerns about the age difference. So she's interested but scared, Tyler summarized. That's progress, right? Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like we're going in circles. She admits she has feelings, then immediately lists all the reasons why acting on them would be a mistake. Jake, think about what she's been through. Her ex-husband spent years convincing her she wasn't worth loving. Now here's this younger guy showing interest, and part of her probably thinks it's too good to be true. So what do? You prove her wrong. Not with words, but with actions. You show up consistently, you treat her with respect, and you let her set the pace. And if she never gets comfortable with the idea? Tyler shrugged. Then at least, you'll know you tried. But something tells me Carol Henderson is stronger than she thinks she is. She just needs to remember that. As I drove home, I thought about Carol's offer to call about the shed project. It felt like an olive branch, a way for her to maintain contact without having to commit to anything personal. Maybe Tyler was right that I needed to prove myself, through actions rather than words. Maybe the shed project could be a chance to show Carol that my interest in her was genuine and lasting. Or maybe I was reading too much into a simple business transaction, and Carol really just wanted a storage shed built in her backyard. Either way, I knew I'd answer when she called. Part 5. The Leap. Carol called on a Thursday morning while I was installing new cabinet hardware for a client across town. Her voice sounded different somehow, more determined than the cautious tone she'd used at the bar. Jake, I'd like to move forward with the shed project if you're still interested. I know it's been a while since we discussed it. Of course, I'm interested. When would you like me to start? Actually, I was wondering if you could come by this afternoon to go over the final details. I've made some changes to the original plans. I arrived at Carol's house that afternoon to find her waiting in the backyard, with a folder of new sketches and a thermos of coffee. She'd clearly spent considerable time refining her ideas, adding details and modifications that showed she'd been thinking seriously about the project. I decided I want windows on 2 sides instead of just one, she explained, spreading the drawings across her patio table. And I'd like to add a small covered area in front, like a mini porch. I studied the revised plans, impressed by the thoughtfulness of her additions. These changes will make it much more functional, almost like a tiny house instead of just storage. That's exactly what I was thinking. Maybe somewhere I could sit and read on rainy days, or have my morning coffee when the weather's nice. We spent an hour going through every detail, discussing materials and timeline. Carol asked intelligent questions and made decisions quickly, but there was an underlying tension to the conversation, like we were both aware we were talking about more than just construction plans. Jake, she said when we'd finished reviewing everything, there's something I need to ask you, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Carol took a deep breath, clearly gathering her courage. Are you interested in me because you actually find me attractive, or because you feel sorry for the lonely older woman? The question hit me like a physical blow. Carol, how could you even think that? Because I'm 55 years old, Jake. I have gray hair, wrinkles around my eyes, and a body that's seen better days. You could have your pick of women your own age. Why would you choose someone like me unless you felt obligated somehow? I set down my coffee and looked at her directly. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? She nodded, though she looked terrified of what I might say. I see a woman who's confident enough to live alone and take care of herself. I see someone who's smart enough to design a storage shed that could be featured in a home magazine. I see kindness in how you treat the teenage cashiers at the hardware store, and strength in how you've rebuilt your life after your divorce. I paused, trying to find the right words. And yes, I see a beautiful woman whose gray hair catches the sunlight and whose smile makes my day better every time I see it. Carol's eyes filled with tears. My ex-husband used to say I was letting myself go, that I'd given up trying to be attractive. Your ex-husband was an idiot. She laughed despite the tears. Maybe he was, but Jake, even if you mean everything you just said, there's still the practical issue of our ages. I'm in my 50s. You're in your 30s. We're at completely different stages of life. Are we? Because it seems to me like we're both figuring out what we want our lives to look like. We're both building something new. But what if you change your mind? What if you meet someone younger and realize what you're missing? I thought about how to answer that. How to make her understand that her age wasn't a barrier I was overlooking, but rather part of what drew me to her. Carol, I've dated women my own age. I've dated women who were still figuring out their careers, who wanted to party every weekend, who changed their minds about major life decisions every few months. That's not what I want anymore. What do you want? I want someone who knows who she is. Someone I can have real conversations with. Someone who's lived enough life to have interesting stories and perspectives. Someone who doesn't need me to complete her, but chooses to be with me anyway. Carol wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. We sat in silence, for a moment both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Carol spoke again. Jake, if we were to try this, to see where it goes, I'd need you to understand something. I can't handle being someone's experiment or phase. I've been hurt too badly to risk that kind of pain again. I'm not looking for an experiment, Carol. I'm looking for something real. And what if people talk? What if they say you're having a midlife crisis, or I'm robbing the cradle? Then they're obviously jealous that we figured out something they haven't. Carol smiled at that, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all afternoon. You're awfully confident for someone who's asking out a woman old enough to be his babysitter. Well, that's a disturbing way to put it. Sorry. Old teacher habit. I like to test whether people really mean what they say. And what's your verdict? Carol stood up and walked to the edge of her patio, looking out at the corner of the yard where we'd planned to build the shed. My verdict is that I'm terrified and excited in equal measure. I joined her at the patio edge. That sounds about right. Jake, if we do this, if we try to see what happens between us, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll be honest if your feelings change. Don't stay with me out of kindness or obligation. I'd rather have my heart broken by honesty than protected by lies. I turned to face her fully. I promise, but I need the same promise from you. Deal. We shook hands solemnly, then both started laughing at the absurdity of sealing a romantic agreement with a business handshake. So, Carol said, what happens now? Now I ask you properly. Carol, would you like to have dinner with me? Just the two of us this time. No matchmaking friends or hidden agendas. Yes, she said without hesitation. I'd like that very much. Saturday night? Saturday night sounds perfect. I started to gather up the shed plans, but Carol stopped me. Jake, there's one more thing. About the shed project. I want you to know that I'm hiring you because you do excellent work, not because of whatever this is between us. If things don't work out romantically, I still want you to finish the shed. And if things do work out romantically, Carol grinned. Then I'll still want you to finish the shed. A girl needs her storage space. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October. I picked Carol up at 7, and she answered the door wearing a blue dress that made her eyes sparkle and her confidence obvious. We drove to a restaurant in the next town over, somewhere we were less likely to run into the Millbrook gossip network. Dinner was everything I'd hoped it would be. We talked about books, travel dreams, childhood memories, and plans for the future. Carol told me about places she wanted to visit, and I shared my ideas about maybe expanding my handyman business into custom furniture building. The conversation flowed easily, without the undercurrent of tension that had marked our recent interactions. Can I ask you something? Carol said over dessert. Anything. What made you so sure about pursuing this? Most men would have backed off after I made it clear how complicated I thought it would be. I thought about her question seriously. I guess because the alternative was pretending I didn't feel what I felt. And I've spent enough of my life pretending to be someone I'm not. What do you mean? I spent years in a job that didn't fit me, trying to be the kind of person who belonged in corporate meetings and networking events. I stayed in that life longer than I should have because it seemed like what I was supposed to want. And now? Now I'm learning to trust my instincts about what actually makes me happy. And my instincts tell me that you make me happy. Carol reached across the table and took my hand. You make me happy too. Scared, but happy. I can live with scared as long as it comes with happy. As we drove back to Millbrook, Carol was quiet, looking out the window at the familiar streets and houses. Regrets already? I asked. No regrets. Just thinking about how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was convinced I was done with romance, done taking risks on other people. Then you showed up to fix my fence and turned everything upside down. Sorry about that. Don't be sorry. Maybe I needed turning upside down. I walked Carol to her door, both of us suddenly awkward now that the evening was ending. We stood on her front porch, neither quite sure how to navigate this new territory we'd entered. Jake, Carol said finally, would you like to come in? For coffee? I'd like that. As we walked into her house together, I realized that whatever happened next, we'd both taken the leap. We'd chosen courage over safety, possibility over certainty. Maybe Tyler was right that sometimes the universe puts people in your path for a reason. And maybe sometimes, if you're brave enough to pay attention, those people turn out to be exactly what you didn't know you were looking for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.